Hello and welcome to Songwriting Tips and Chats with Nick Vulture. And I would like to start today's episode with my normal acknowledgement of the country that I'm on, which is the Ghana country of Adelaide or Tandanya, South Australia in Australia. And I would like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging from the Ghana country. And it's actually a very special day in Australia right now, as I record, on the 14th of October, going to a referendum around providing a voice to the Indigenous peoples of Australia into our parliament and recognising their existence and their importance in our country, which to date has been left out of our constitution. So it's an important day on that topic. So today's episode, I promised in the last one that I would bring in a special guest to talk a bit more about the art of songwriting. And so far I've shared how I go about songwriting, but it's important to get other views because everybody, as I've mentioned before, everybody writes songs in a different way. And it's good to be able to explore some other ideas. And I will introduce my guest now. My special guest is another South Australian singer-songwriter who's been around the Adelaide music scene for quite some time, achieved a lot in that time. Her name is Jen Lush. Welcome, Jen.
Thank you for having me, Nick. It's good to be here.
Yeah, great. And it's a real privilege to have you here exploring this topic with me and for those that engage and listen to this podcast. Just quickly on Jen, and Jen, fill me in if I've missed something, but I think to date you have released 3 albums.
I've released 3 albums under my name, but I've been in other things that have been recording with other people over the years.
Yeah, okay. Yep, excellent. And I would describe your genre of music as modern folk, and I think I may have stolen that off your website as well. So I think that's perfectly fitting. Or contemporary folk, is that how you would explain it?
Yeah. I think the current band bring an element of rock to the soundscape. So sometimes I kind of think of it as folk rock as well. But that depends on who's holding the guitars. If I'm holding the guitar, it's very much folk.
Yeah. So I've seen Jen play a number of times, both with her band and with just an acoustic guitar, and it's a real treat. So if you are in the South Australian region or Adelaide, I certainly would encourage people to go and watch Jen play live. But also, Jen, you do play festivals around the country as well, so you're not just restricted to playing in the Adelaide region. You've had experience playing all around Australia.
Yeah, that's been a lovely part of the music is being able to share it widely within Australia at least, and of course with the internet and streaming and all that sort of thing, people from all over the place can access music from anywhere, so that's quite nice. But I have enjoyed taking the band on the road and going different places, and we're heading off to the Malden Folk Festival in Victoria soon, so that's going to be lovely because it's a beautiful little festival that I've kind of had my eye on for a while. So
fantastic. I'm a big fan, Jen, and so you were the first person I thought of to come onto this podcast as a guest and talk through a little bit more, partly because I'm a big fan, and the other reason is because I feel like your approach to songwriting is different to mine, and so I think I think that's good. If I just had someone on here confirming what I'd said, I don't know what the point would be. I think that you go about your songwriting quite differently. So I think that it'll be fun to sort of tap into that a little bit as well. Just so that you know, if you haven't heard the podcast, that just quickly, some ideas that I've thrown around to date are around how to approach writing your first song. 3 things that I've talked about repeatedly, to be honest in the song. So my first bit of advice to emerging or new songwriters is maybe, unless you're a really good fictional writer already, I wouldn't go down the fictional line. So we'll come back to you on that one, Jen. I would explore honest stories, whether they're your own, whether they're someone else's, or maybe a combination of stories. I don't think that matters too much. It's actually quite good sometimes to merge stories into one, but to be honest about it and not try and get too clever with fictional characters or fictional stories in the first instance. I think as you develop as a songwriter, that happens and you can get good at that, but it's very tough to do that off the cuff, I think. Secondly, my other bit of advice was it's okay to be uncomfortable. In fact, it's good to be uncomfortable. I think songwriting is about, for me anyway, personally, songwriting is a way of exploring the things that you don't like talking about. So it's actually good to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. So that's the second bit of advice. So not to be scared about being uncomfortable. And thirdly, and this was just a tip from my point of view, and I'm really keen on your thoughts with this, Jen, but a way that I often start a story is by, or at least how I did initially, is to grab a saying that we use regularly or that is out there in the public narrative or that you've heard someone use on a bus or a train, and it's a quick grab of a saying. And I talked in an early example about the first song I ever wrote for solo being the song Perfect Storm. And the term perfect storm is a saying that we use in daily vernacular around things happening, bad things happening, but maybe for a good reason. So I used that perfect storm to build a story around that. So that was my platform for jumping off and then putting lyrics around it. So I've heard recently other songwriters talk about similar approaches, but not so much maybe sayings, maybe things they've seen, more visual grabs rather than sayings. But anyway, they're the three things that I've talked about a fair bit so far. So I've got some questions for you now, Jen, because I really want to pick them apart. How do you find a story? How do you start up your storytelling? What sort of things feed into that for you?
Well, I think different songs come to me in different ways. So if I was to sit down and think I'd like to write a song, I'd probably get my guitar and start noodling and have a little play and see if there's some progressions or something that sounds really interesting, or a nice little riff or something to build something on to start with. And once I've got that, then I might start to layer a melodic idea over the top. So a bit of a little tune that complements the guitar part beautifully. And it might just start evolving and start hearing different things. And I'll, at that point, get my little voice memo out and start saying, oh, that sounds really beautiful together. That's a really nice little complementary tune, rhythmically as well as melodically. And then once I've got that, then I realize that I've got a framework for some words. And it's sometimes at that point that I start thinking, well, have I written anything in my journal writing, in my poetry or journaling that I do? Have I got something that would fit that feeling that I've created? So I might go back to things that I've already started writing. Otherwise, other times I've definitely developed an idea as I've been humming a little melodic tune. I'll kind of start to form words against that and that will start to come out. So in terms of content, quite often I'm going back to things that I've written before. Right. And they might be things that I've felt inspired to write about. So it might be something that's come to me when I'm on a walk and I notice the way that the sap is dripping off a tree and I'm contemplating what's trapped in it, or I might be thinking about my kids and the way that they're interacting, and I might think about that and it might spark an idea. So it's usually from things that I'm either observing or feeling about the world. I really love to hone in on the minutiae, the tiniest detail, and then that will often spark into something big. Often it will be like that tiny thing will represent a much bigger notion. Yeah.
I really love that. You made me think about a few things in there. Like I love the minutiae idea and to capture something. And I think it's really important for people when something unusual or interesting in that way catches their attention to write it down really quickly. And we're very lucky to have these days we can do that on a phone. Like I use my notes. Even last night I was watching a gig and I was having ideas just watching a gig, and I started using the notes app on my phone to just quickly write them down, because it's very easy a few hours later to forget what you were thinking about or what was catching your attention. So I love that idea. You also touched on a topic which I talked a little bit about last time, which is that the age old and sometimes annoying question of lyrics or music first. And what the thing I talked about for me is to not have one or the other. It's okay to be flexible in that, and sometimes you, like you said, you'll have a melody will come to you or a tune will come to you, and you'll get that down and then build lyrics in later. But interestingly, the way you explained it is that you often have those lyrics or the ideas already written down somewhere in poetry form or something like that.
Yeah. I try to collect ideas like you did at the gig, where you noted things down, and that might be just one line, or it might be a whole lot of things that come out as a bit of a brain dump on a thing, and those things I will come back to and refine, and they might not fit the structures that I've made, but all of that is up for grabs. It's just a starting point or a leaping off point. So I often go back to things that I've written before, just because I feel like you'll be caught in the middle of a moment and think, and just quickly note it down, and it can be the beginning of something. You know that you're not going to remember it later, so it's best to grab it while it often happens while I'm bushwalking. I'll often find myself, because my mind is on other things, and it's that perfect space for your brain. It's a liminal space where your brain is it's like not letting your eyes focus too greatly. It's that kind of slightly unfocused space where I feel like ideas have a chance to come in and you can ruminate on things. And I feel like that's a really important place. Whereas if I was sitting down, I'm going to write a song, and I sit there and I'm waiting for something to happen, your brain isn't in that same really dreamy, strange space where ideas can happen. I often talk about that, when you some of your best ideas will come while you're chopping vegetables or cooking dinner, because you're not looking at it intently. Your mind is wandering, and it's an important place to be, I think. That
I agree, and you've made me think about that. I don't bushwalk, but I do walk a lot because I live near the coast, and I do a lot of coastal walks. I make sure that I do every day. And you're so right. Like your mind goes off into another world when you're out doing something like that. And there's been many times when I've like you come up with ideas for songs on those walks, and to have the phone handy makes a massive difference. In the other way that, I don't know if you have this, but I bet you do. The other way that sometimes comes to you is in your sleep, and you wake up and quickly jot something down, because by morning time it's going to be gone. And that happens to me quite a bit as well. And maybe the brain is in a similar mode during sleep as it is to when you're just doing something inane like walking or like you say, chopping vegetables.
Yeah, and similarly, if I'm writing a song and I've gotten myself stuck in a spot where I don't know where to go next with it, or it's sort of like a problem that you need to solve, but by sitting there and staring at it, that's not really helping either. I can't even tell you how many times I've just been either walking the dog or cooking or just folding clothes, folding the washing or whatever, and it's come, a solution has come, and it might not be the solution, but it's a way of, navigating your way through. And I think, and that's usually how it works.
Yeah, so true. The other thing you mentioned, which I think is important as well, and you didn't describe it as phrasing, but I've talked a little bit about in one of the other podcasts, the other episodes around, the phrasing of your wording needs to sound good in the music as well. So sometimes I can, and this isn't a criticism, but sometimes I can hear musicians that have a deliberate set of lyrics and a deliberate tune, and they haven't sort of massaged them into something that sounds right. And you talked a bit about, you like to, sometimes you'll play the tune on a guitar or a tune, and then or maybe hum a melody that would sound good in that. I'm guessing then that when the words come in, they need to sound a bit like that melody that you were humming. So they need to sound right in the music.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, it's an interesting part of the process. And I think writing lyrics is often a thing that can be left to, or given the least amount of time. We can get really focused on the music and how the tune and the melodies and the guitar lick and the percussion and all of those other elements that come in, but how we make those words sound and how they sound in our mouth and how they sound to the ear is I think a really important thing. And most important is the story, getting that story out. And I do a lot of work, as you know, we're setting music around other people's poetry. So there's 2 albums that have focused on the poetry of other people and creating music around those. Now those words are set in, so they began that way, and the music came in around them. And so there's times where I'm singing a line and I'm thinking, no one in their right mind, no songwriter would have written that line, because it sounds hard to say. It's actually hard to sing it even. But I'm working with what I'm working with, and I love the line because the poem is brilliant, and you don't want to change a thing. And so I've definitely often found myself in a situation where I'm singing words that, don't have a lovely vowel sound, or they're a really hard consonant, and you think, how am I going to, make this work? So I enjoy the challenge of doing that.
I was going to ask you about the poetry sort of, aside to your music, and how you've used other people's poetry and written them into tunes, which I would suggest to people starting out, that's a skill that takes some time, because it sounds to me like it's really difficult, Jen.
It could be considered quite difficult, especially when it's contemporary poetry that isn't to a meter, or it's not sort of set phrasing. So my dad, I grew up with my dad, he's a songwriter, and he would also set poetry to songs. So there might be Henry Lawson poetry or Banjo Patterson kind of poetry. So they're in rhyming stanzas. They've got their set little spot, and you know where you are. And he'd often do those, and to great success. And they were very, very beautiful songs. And I've always loved the idea of poetry and music being smushed together and getting the best of both worlds. But the ones that I choose are contemporary poetry, and they have no rhyming phrases. They have no cues, and you kind of really in this maze of a puzzle that you're trying to untangle. Possibly that's what I'm drawn to, because I like that crazy challenge of it. But some of them are simple. Some of them seem to be simple. Some of them, it doesn't feel treacherous and difficult. Other ones are just laid with booby traps everywhere, and you think, why did I start this? This is insane. And some are more successful than others. Some of them I just feel like I haven't nailed it at all, but I enjoy the challenge of it.
Yeah, I think it's an amazing idea and an amazing challenge. Not one I'm brave enough to have a crack at just yet, but I really like it. I really think that, there's going to come a time in everyone's career, perhaps, when maybe they feel like they need a different challenge with their songwriting, and whether that be to start writing more fictional stories, or like you've done, go down the track of exploring other people's lyrics and words and poetry and building that into, or whatever it might be. But I think that that's a natural evolution in the songwriting process, and you're also good at it, Jen.
Thanks. I sort of feel like it feeds my my understanding of working with words. I feel like it's it was a rabbit hole I wanted to go down, because I wanted to learn about crafting words differently and finding new ways to say things. And so I feel like it's informed my own writing in a way that perhaps I wasn't going to be able to generate on my own.
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually. when I came back home to Adelaide, I reconnected with a guy I used to work with, and I didn't know this, but he is very much into classical poetry, like obsessed by classical poetry. And it did start, like, we had a number of conversations around it over a coffee and just walking around and stuff. And it did start to spark my interest. And I have been not nowhere near like him, but I've now been starting to get into, exploring some of the more classical poets, not yet the modern poets, but for the same reason, because I feel like it's helping me with my words as well. So I think it's a good idea to if you are starting out on the songwriting trail, to make sure that you're also reading a lot of other people's material, because you need those sorts of ideas around the use of words. So even good authors, like fictional authors as well, I think is good.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Jen, this is really interesting. And even though I said you go about things differently to me, it's actually not that different. I think that you tapping into poetry is different, and it might give people some other ideas. I think the way that you explained the sitting down and writing a song and then humming a melody and then finding words you've already written, to me that really shows the need to be flexible and have a range of things going on, maybe at the same time, and eventually bringing them together and making them sound good, as well as telling a really good story as well. Yeah. The other thing I wanted to ask you about is, just for a bit of fun, who are your musical influences?
Well, I'm really drawn to Sam Beam from Iron and Wine. He's a poet as well as a songwriter, and I feel like that really comes through with his lyric writing. He's also got a beautiful tone in his voice, and I really enjoy the sort of the contemporary folk genre that he's working in. But I think he writes about, I connected with what you said a lot before about being honest when you were talking about a strategy to keep in mind when songwriting. I feel like he writes about his family, he writes about his life, he writes about the things that he's noticing. He'll he might get a little political about something that might have happened in a town or whatever. He's not afraid to be really honest and say things, but he says them in such beautiful ways. He's got a real tender and kind-hearted view of the world, I think, an optimistic view, and isn't afraid to talk about the ugliness, but finds a way through. And I feel like he's one of those magical songwriters. There's lots. There's a lot of people that I connect with and follow, but he's been one for quite a long time now that I will still go back to and really love his writing. Yeah. But I mean, I think that honesty thing, I feel like I'm still trying to find a way to speak honestly and authentically about my own things in songs. Yeah. So I feel like that's an ongoing challenge. What is the most, because you've got to be concise in a song. You have to be, you can't go on forever. It's not a novel. So you've got to be able to be concise and fit it into this tiny little moment that you've got. And so I think that's a big challenge for me, because I'm not a concise thinker.
Yeah. And in that, I've talked before about, like the honesty around your own story or your own, what you're trying to purvey. There's also that juxtaposition, I guess, of trying to make sure that it's broad enough that others can relate to it. You can get too literal and too detailed around those things sometimes, and I think it's important to. And this is where the exploration of words is really important, because you need to be able to use words that, for you know what they mean for you, but they could mean other things to other people. So there's an element of staying a little bit just above the detail in the use of words, I think. But still completely honest, because I've had someone say to me at a show once that one of my songs, called "This Year's a Thief," it was her favorite song right now. And I said, oh, that's interesting because it's about this and that. And I explained the sort of background to that story. And she she was somewhat disappointed because it wasn't what it was about to her. So which was interesting because I thought it was quite obvious, but obviously I'd use words just broad enough to enable someone listening to it to get something else out of it that meant something to her.
Absolutely.
So I learned a lesson from that. Don't explain too much about your song. Let the song do the talking and let other people interpret it, I think.
And I need to take that advice because often when I perform, I often do a massive explanation about what things are about. But I definitely hear that. And there are times when I think, no, I should have just let that be. And let people interpret it the way they want to. Because I've often been a very big user of metaphor and simile in my songwriting.
Yeah.
And that's partly because I'm afraid. I'm a little bit of a coward and I can't easily say the thing that I'm trying to say. So I find a way of saying it that's not as confronting. Because as we know, as songwriters and as performers, there's a hell of a lot of putting yourself on the line in front of other people. And it's taken me a long time to feel like I can own what I'm saying and not be too afraid of either sharing too much or offending somebody with what I've said or whatever. So I've drawn on metaphor and simile, abstract concepts a lot in my own songwriting over the years. And sometimes that's good. And other times it's just me being a coward. But there's a line, say, in a song called Gold Thread that I wrote, where it says, I'm 2 parts underwater. I'm 1 part staying dry above the tide. I need more than oxygen to stay alive. And so I'm talking about drowning in motherhood and in expectation. I'm talking about anxiety and depression. So I'm talking about that. I'm basically saying I'm pretty low. I'm as low as I'm going to get. I'm just like this. So I'm picturing myself like this, when I've got my nose to breathe with, but the rest of me is underwater. I could have just said, I'm feeling really flat. But my way of doing things is to sort of find another way to say it and hope that people catch on.
I think that's okay, though. I think that if you were to say, I'm feeling really flat, I don't think it has the same effect. I think you but it is an interesting line to dance, isn't it? Because sometimes it's right to say it more obviously, and other times it's not. So it's just about using I think going with your gut in some respect is the way to do it. I find in my early solo songwriting that I was using, like you, a lot of metaphors because I was scared about saying what it is that I was saying so clearly. But in recent times, I think the more I listen to people like John Prine, the more I've just realized, look, just say it, but say it cleverly, like say it well. Don't just say it, but it's okay to be a little bit less, covering it up. I saw an interview with a musician, one of Australia's most famous musicians. I won't say who it was, but he was asked about, like his personal life and stuff in this interview, and he said, I don't really talk about those things. Those things are in my songs. And so if you want to know about it, like listen to my songs. That's where it stays, which I think is great. I think that songwriting provides a safe space for us. But you're right, it's hard because you are putting yourself on the line.
Yeah, that's right. So it's always that there's a tightrope, and I think often if I've been really metaphorical or something in a line, I would then maybe make the following thing a bit clearer, or I'll make the chorus be much more explicit. So with that same song, a bit later on, I go to say, I'm reaching in, I'm digging down for the gold thread, the fine spun gold, stronger than blood. So that's still a bit of a metaphor, I suppose, but it's saying what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to hold on to something golden. So I guess some songs are more successful than others in that regard, where you can be a little bit more elusive about something, as long as you kind of give people a little bit of a link to something that's a bit more tangible, maybe.
I think that is a fantastic tip for people. If you're using metaphors and you feel like you're overdoing it, like, balance it. It's a balance. So maybe in the next line or the next chorus, or in the chorus, be a bit more explicit around the meaning of the song. So I think that's a really nice way to finish our podcast today. And I'm going to pull out 2 tips from today that we haven't talked about before. And the first one is, from your songwriting approach, Jen, is to make sure that you've got notebooks handy, whether they be digital on an app or real, doesn't matter. But to when you get an idea or a thought, or you see something, or you hear something, you can catch it straight away. Don't miss it, because the reality is you will forget it, and it'll slip by, and you'll be thinking hours later, what the heck was that, or that I was going to write down. So have something there, get it down, because once a tune comes to you, as Jen talked about, you can start to build it into the song. And the second thing is that what we just talked about there, balance the metaphors and the cover-ups with something real and a bit clearer and a bit more explicit. I think that's a really great way of going about the honesty approach to songwriting, in a way that feels safe, but also that you're getting a message out as well. So I think that's fantastic, Jen.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I like how you've kind of made it much more coherent than what
I like to sum it up at the end of each one of these, so that there's a takeaway message. And I think I feel like you and I have maybe more of a similar approach to songwriting than what I thought. I haven't been brave enough to look at other people's poetry yet, but I feel like a lot of the other approaches are similar to what I've talked about, and you've been very good helping me at pulling some of those other little tips out. So thank you so much.
Oh, well, that's great. It's been really, really lovely talking about it and listening to your advice, and I feel like we could talk for a long time.
I love this topic. I think talking about songwriting is one of my favorite things, and
Me too.
And I'm only learning myself.
Same.
We're probably always learning, to be honest.
It's a continuum, isn't it? It sort of feels like we're always after the holy grail of the perfect song that we're going to write one day, where it's going to just nail it, And I feel like that's a noble cause for the world, even if it's just for your own world. I think it's a noble cause. I think art does, it's part of being an artist and contributing ideas and crafting something to share to make things better.
Jen summed it up perfectly. Thank you so much. Jen Lush has been our special guest today, and make sure that you get onto a digital platform and download and follow Jen as well. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you. Thanks, Nick.